I'm sharing my recipe for Beet Borscht. This is a hearty and delicious soup that I always cook in the fall. If you have never tried Beet Borscht, you are in for a treat. It is packed with vegetables, and my kids actually ask me to make it. So stick around and see how easily this meal comes together, and put it on your list of things to make as the weather gets colder. I like to prep all of my vegetables ahead of time, get everything peeled and chopped before I actually start cooking. So I'm gonna start by dicing one onion. Then I'm gonna peel and chop my beets. So I'm chopping the top and the root end off of the beets, and then I'm just going to peel them and chop them into roughly a 1/2 inch dice. And then normally I have much bigger beets that I'm working with, but these ones are a lot smaller than what I usually use. I usually grow them in my garden. This year I didn't have a garden, so just grab these from the grocery store after one of my sons asked if I was gonna be making this soup this fall. And I would normally use about 3 large beets, and one of those beets from my garden would probably be 2 to 3 times the size of one of these. So if you have big beets, 3 beets would do it. Because I've got smaller ones, I'd probably do 9-ish. However, I got these from the grocery store. I wasn't sure how many to buy. I ended up with 12. So I'm just gonna go with that. Soup is very forgiving, so use what you have. This is rustic budget cooking. This is not precision based. And so if you've got a little more vegetables or a little less, just use what you have. My hands are gonna get very red from doing this, but I'm not bothering to wear gloves. Beets do have a lot of color in them, but funnily enough, they don't really stain. And my daughter and I tried to make a naturally dyed shirt with using different foods that contain a lot of color. And we thought we'd end up with a pink shirt if we used beets to color the fabric. And we ended up with a white shirt because all of the color from the beets washed right out of that t-shirt. So yes, my hands are gonna get very pink, but they will clean up without much issue. So I don't wanna worry about having gloves and having things be even harder to maintain a grip on. So I'm just gonna use bare hands to do this. Now I'm going to peel and chop 6 good-sized potatoes, similar size pieces to the beets that I just cut, and I'm going to put the pieces of potato in a bowl of cold water to stop the starch from browning them while they wait to go into the soup pot. And you don't need to worry about your potatoes turning pink while you're chopping on the board that you just used for your beets, because your beets are going to turn your potatoes pink very quickly once they're in the pot anyway. So don't worry about that color transfer. It's inevitable. You're not going to have white potatoes in this Beet Borscht. Okay, now lastly, I'm gonna peel and chop some carrots. I like to slice my carrots at the narrow end, and then when they get a little too large, I'll cut it in half and just continue slicing. And then at the thickest end, I will quarter it so that the slices are all sort of similarly sized. I don't want different diameters of carrots. I don't know, does that make sense? Sometimes if you have sliced carrots from the fat part of the carrot, in my mind, it's just too large to put in a soup spoon. So I'll show you what I mean. So now it's getting a bit thicker here. So I'm just going to, well, it's a pretty similar thickness all the way to the end now. So this one I'll just cut in half. But now this one is getting kind of thick toward the end. So I'm going to cut it in half, but then quarter it, and I keep my stem end attached so that it all stays in one piece. I don't have 4 pieces flopping around. And then when I slice it, I end up with nice small little quarters. Okay, now the last vegetable we need is cabbage, and you could chop that yourself, but I find that bagged coleslaw is a really easy shortcut here. I use an entire bag of shredded coleslaw. It's got red cabbage, green cabbage, and carrots in here. If you wanted to buy cabbage, you'd use about half of an average head of cabbage. But when I've done that, I end up with another half of cabbage in my fridge, and I don't really make much else with cabbage, so it just sits there. So using the coleslaw mix is a really easy shortcut. So I'd recommend that you do that. So now that all of my vegetables are ready, I can start cooking. I've got my pot over medium heat here. So now I'm gonna put 2 tablespoons of butter in here, and I'm going to add my diced up onion as well. I'm just gonna saute my onions until they're starting to get translucent. My onions are softening up now, so I'm going to add my potatoes. I've drained the water off of these. I'm gonna pour those in. I'm also gonna add the beets. And lastly, the carrots. I didn't forget about my cabbage. That's gonna come later though. For now, I just want these tougher veggies that take a little more time to cook. I want them in there first. And I'm gonna give them all a little stir. And then the next thing I wanna do is cover this with broth. Now, you could just use water. I like to use some chicken broth just to add a little more depth of flavor. Normally, I will do water with Better Than Bouillon concentrate. So I'd pour the water in the pot and then I'd add a few scoops of Better Than Bouillon. But I have some chicken stock here because I cooked the bones from a few chickens a few days ago. This bone broth is going to add a lot of extra nutrition to the soup. So I'm just gonna get this. Look at that. Look at the gelatin in there. Oh, my kids always freak out about this, but it's so good for you. So I'm gonna get that warmed up, melted down, and then if there's not enough liquid in here, I'll just cover it with a little extra water afterward. I was a little worried that this was not gonna be a big enough pot too, but it looks like we're gonna be okay. So the last thing I need before I put the lid on this, we just need some seasoning. And borscht would not be borscht without dill. And I usually like to use fresh. So if I have it in the fridge fresh, that's great. Or I'll have it in bunches in the freezer, just ready to add to soup. But since we just moved this summer, I don't have all the goodies on hand that I usually do. So if you're like me and you need to use dried dill, just toss 3 tablespoons into your pot. If you have fresh, about a half a cup of fresh dill is a good amount. So there's 3 tablespoons of dill. Then I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. You could do 1 to 2 teaspoons of salt depending on if your chicken broth has any sodium added to it. Mine doesn't have any salt in it, so I went for 2 teaspoons of salt, and then I might have to adjust the salt later. And 1 teaspoon of black pepper and 1 bay leaf. So I'm gonna stir this up a little bit more and put the lid on. I mean, this pot is technically big enough, but I guess I should be a little more careful when I'm stirring. I don't think I mentioned how much broth you should add. 10 to 14 cups is about right. Really, you just want to make sure that everything is covered with liquid. If you don't have enough in there to have your vegetables all covered so that they're simmering in your liquid, then you need to add more. But I like my soup to be quite hearty and thick, so I don't want too much liquid to solids ratio. But now I'll show you, I'll bring the camera closer and you can see how my broth is all nicely melted into here already. That's a great ratio of liquid to solids there. Everything's covered. So now I'm going to put the lid on and bring this up to a simmer. So I did turn my temperature up a little bit just to get this coming up a little bit hotter. I had it set to a medium-high heat and it's starting to simmer now, so I'm turning it back down to sort of a medium-low, and I'm gonna keep the lid on and let that continue to cook until my potatoes are fork tender. So I'll come back in a little while when the potatoes are cooked through a little better. Hey, the borscht has been simmering for about half an hour, and I wanted to show you the potatoes. I pulled one out, fished it out so I could show you. This, is it gonna focus? See how the fork just slides right in there? That is what I'm talking about with a fork tender potato. It's perfect. And so now I'm going to add my bag of coleslaw, and I'm gonna let this simmer for another probably 10 to 15 minutes. The cabbage doesn't need super long in here. Okay, I'll see you again in 10 to 15 minutes. All right, the cabbage should be tendered now, and I wanna just remind you, if you don't know, take your bay leaves out of your pot before you serve this, because these can be really dangerous if you leave them in there. They're kind of Velcro-y and you can choke on them, get them stuck in your throat. So make sure you pull your bay leaves out of your dishes if you're using them for seasoning. They add great flavor, but they can be risky if you don't take them out. So having said that, I'm now gonna scoop up a bowl of this and give it a taste. Now, in order to add some protein to this, I'll put some cooked chicken out on the table. I have some in my freezer, and I'm just gonna serve the soup with the chicken alongside, and then my family can add as much chicken as they want to their bowl. And I also love to serve this with some fresh bread or buns. Slather that in butter and dunk it in your soup. Oh, there's nothing better. I've got a sourdough loaf that will taste so good with this that I baked today. So scoop some up in a bowl, add some meat if you want, chicken or ground beef, and then top it with a dollop of sour cream or regular cream. If you don't care for that sour taste, you could put sweeter, like whipping cream or half and half into this and dig in. Wow, that's good. There is something so comforting about homemade soup, right? And this deep, earthy flavor from the beets in this, along with the vibrant color that it adds, just make this a fall favorite in our house. The flavor just gets better when you have it as leftovers the day after or for a few days after. So I'm curious to know, are you cooking soup these days? Let me know if you try this one and share some of your favorite soups with me in the comments below. I could use some more ideas. I'll see you again soon.